In this video I'm going to be demonstrating how to draw a simple shape in SketchUp, and we're going to do this stepped block. And I'd like you to have a look at the dimensions we have. We have 90 millimeters in length along the red axis. We have 40 millimeters in height along the blue axis. We have 35 millimeters in depth along the green axis. The steps are equal height. They're both 20 millimeters up. And in this distance here along the red, we've got 40 millimeters for the lower step and 50 millimeters for the upper step. So we're going to switch across to SketchUp for Schools and start the drawing from there. Now, there are many ways of drawing this stepped block, and I will show some of them to you, but just about every one of them starts with a rectangle. So we start with the rectangle tool here, and we click on there. The shortcut is R. I'm going to click once on the origin, and then I'm going to drag my rectangle out. Now as I drag, I'd like you to be looking at the dimensions block, because when I drag in this way, you can see firstly there are two numbers in the dimensions block, 47 millimeters, 7 millimeters, and that tells you that the length along the 47 is along the red, whereas if I come this way it switches around. I've got 8 and 79, so the 79 millimeters has been measured along the green, so that is the red dimension the green dimension. And what we're going to do is we're going to drag it out. It doesn't actually matter where we put it. I can try to drag and get this exactly accurate as long as I have my settings set to snap to even millimeters. That might work, but a far better way is just simply drag, drop anywhere. It doesn't matter where I have it, and it doesn't matter if I move my mouse. I do not need to come and click into this box. I certainly must not click anything else first before I do this, but right away what I can do is I can type 90, 35, and if you remember, 90 was the measurement along the red axis that I want, 35 along the green. I hit enter, and that rectangle will resize, and it will be precise. So that is 90.0. There is no possibility of a fractional millimeter happening there. So I cannot emphasize enough that if you want accuracy, you need to be typing a dimension or later snapping to something that is already a known dimension, and I'll demonstrate what I mean by that in a minute. The next thing you need to be doing is pulling it into a three-dimensional shape. So the basic process is always draw a rectangle, get the size correct. Then you use the push-pull tool, which is this one here, and the shortcut is P. You come hover over the surface and you can see that the texture changes. So we're going to click and we're going to hold the button down and pull upwards. Now the height I wanted was 40 millimeters, and I can certainly drag up until the distance box in the bottom shows 40. At the moment it's showing 26, but the easier is just pull it up in the direction I want it. It doesn't matter how far, and release the mouse button. It's not the correct height, but to get the correct height before I type or click anything else, and I do not go click into the measurements box because that wouldn't work. So before I click or type or move anything else, I type in 40 and press enter, and the height is set to 40. Okay, and just to demonstrate that, I can put up my dimensions here. So my dimension tool is this one over here, and I can pick dimensions, and I can go from end point, and you'll see that it snaps to the end, and then it will snap to the end, and I pull it out and it says 90 millimeters. So if I snap from end to end, SketchUp works with snapping as a number of different ways. End to end is a common one. So you can see my basic dimensions are correct. So now I have to think about how I'm going to make my step, and what I have is a big block, and I have to cut this corner away from here. Now there are many ways of doing this. As I said, the simplest is to realize that this surface here is where the step is shaped. So what I can do is I can use my guide tool. So I come over here to my tape measure tool to create guidelines, and I click on my red axis and I drag upwards. Now you can see firstly that there's a blue line below it, which means that I'm going up in the direction of the blue axis. If I went out this way, I'd be going out in the direction of the green, and if I was there, it would be somewhere at a different angle. So if I was somewhere up here, you wouldn't actually see that arrow at the moment, but it would be a different angle altogether, and that tells you it's not on either one of these axes. So I'm going to pull it up on that axis, and I have two choices. I know that I can type in 20 millimeters, and that would work perfectly, and in most cases that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to undo that. The alternative is that I know that this is 40 millimeters and 20 millimeters is the middle. Now I can snap to the ends of a line. I can snap to lines just to anywhere on the line, but line has a midpoint, and so I can snap onto that, and that is a quick way of getting that 20 millimeters because it happens to be the midpoint. Now when I want to go across the opposite direction, across here, I'm going to click onto the blue axis. I'm going to pull a line parallel to that blue axis. I can no longer go to the midpoint because that is 45 millimeters, and that's shown in the measurements box in the corner. So instead what I'm going to do, and I haven't clicked it, if I had clicked this down, I can type. I don't need to. I just type in 40 and hit click, and there we have it. Now I can create the shape that I need for my step by taking my line tool. I can snap, in this case, to the intersection. It is the midpoint of the line again. It is the intersection. I can come it across here. You'll see my line is shown as red because it's parallel to the axis, but it doesn't matter if it isn't. It'll come across here, and again it'll snap to the intersection. Now my line tool is still active because I haven't enclosed a surface, so I can draw wherever I want. I come up here and I can click on the intersection. So there I have got what is now two separate surfaces. I've split this one big surface into two smaller ones. That's what I want to have remaining. That's what I want to take away. And the way I do that is by using the push-pull tool. I click on there and I push away, and I keep pushing until it disappears. And there's the shape that you need. Now I'm going to undo a whole lot of things here. I'm going to undo all of that, and I'm going to show you a different way that it can be done, still with the line tool but without using guidelines, because of the fact that this is starting on the midpoint, and it is relying on the fact that I'm starting on the midpoint. So once I start on the midpoint, I can take my line, and you can see that it will automatically follow the red axis if I give it a chance. And I know this line is going to be 40 millimeters long, so I can type 40 and click enter, and there's my line. From here I can do it across, and you can see my line is blue, therefore it is vertical. It will snap to the edge, and I can click that. Now if I go to push pull using the pull tool, I can take it away. Same job, no guidelines. Now I'm going to show you a different way. You'll notice that that little surface there was a rectangle, so all I really need to do is come here and take the rectangle tool, start in this corner and drag a new rectangle, and we know that the length of the rectangle has to be 40 and the height has to be 20. Now I've managed to get that exactly right if you have a look in the dimensions bar, and I could click at that point, but it is still better to type in 40, 20 because I know it is precise that way. There I have my rectangle. I switch across into my push-pull tool and I push it away yet again. So that's all working from this surface. There are other surfaces that it can be done from. I don't have to push-pull from this surface. I can push-pull from either this one or this one. So if I start on this surface, I can take my tape measure tool. I can draw a single line across. We know that is 40 millimeters from this edge. I take my line tool. The shortcut is L. I can click on the intersection. I can click on the intersection. I now have two surfaces, and I pressed space to switch back to my select tool. I have two separate surfaces. This one here, if I press P to get my push-pull tool, and I can push it down, and I type in 20, and there is my shape. Easy. But again, remember what I said is we know the step is halfway up, and we know this has midpoints. So if I simply take a line, I can snap onto my midpoint here. I can come across. Now firstly, you can see that that is a green line. It's parallel to the green surface, but equally it's going to snap onto the midpoint on the other side. I now have two separate surfaces there and there. So if I take my push-pull tool, and I need to take that away, I take my push-pull tool and I go there, I can push that in, and I know the distance I need to push it in is 40. So there's lots of different ways working from different surfaces to get the same stepped block over and over again, and some of them I've been using guidelines created with the tape measure tool. Some of them I haven't. If there's existing geometry or points on the lines that you can use, you do not necessarily need to use tape measure tool, but that relies on the fact that this started on the midpoint. If I didn't have that midpoint, I would have to first create a point on the tape measure tool. Now I say the tape measure tool, I don't need to create a line. The tape measure itself can also come along. If I take my tape measure tool, I can take along this line and type 40, and I don't get a guideline. All I get is a point. Now I can use that, press my L for line tool, and I can draw across, and you can see that I'm on green. In this case, it's not snapping to midpoint, it's just snapping onto edge, and that's exactly the same thing. And then I use my push-pull tool using the letter P, and I drag it down. Now I can drag it down 50, or I can come over here and I can snap to other parts of the geometry midpoint, and that's the correct distance down. So you can snap in various ways to different parts of the geometry. You can match and pull to match another piece of the drawing around it. If there was another object or another surface, you can push-pull to match. And you can see that this has the guideline and the guide point still remaining. It's just a different way of doing the guidelines with the tape, or guide points with the tape measure tool. Get familiar with the tape measure tool to do this. Now I'm going to undo all of this right back to that point. And to undo, I'm using Control Z. It's this button up here. Command Z on a Mac, I think it is. And everything I've done so far started with a big block and I cut it away. But again, there is a different method of doing it. When I cut it away, that's the woodwork method, or if I had something like a CNC router, I would be removing material to create my shape. But if I'm working on a 3D printer, what I'm doing is I'm laying down a bed and I'm building it up. And so that's the equivalent of saying I've laid down my rectangle, I'm going to push-pull. What I'm going to do is I'm only going to pull it up 20 millimeters to start with. See my distance 20, and that's the height of this first step. So now I can use one of the techniques I've used before. I'm going to use the tape measure tool, and I'm going to use the guide. That's taking my dimensions, sorry, tape measure tool. I'm going to use the guide lines because I want it on both sides, and I'm going to type in 40. Now I'm going to use my line tool, and I'm going to draw that line across from there to there. And then what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to use my push-pull tool, and I'm going to continue to build this shape up. This is the part of the step that needs to come up, so I can pull it up again, and that distance again needs to be 20. Type in the 20, and there I have my shape. So I can actually build up and extrude upwards, which is a summative approach similar to 3D printing, or I can use the approach where I cut material away, a subtractive approach, which is similar to what we do with a saw in woodwork on the bench, or we can do it on a CNC router as well. The final thing I want to show you is that if you have a whole lot of guidelines in various places, we might have set up a number of them like this. If I wanted to remove them all at once, I can come here, or I can erase them by just selecting this and erasing the guidelines as I like. But if I wanted to remove them all at once, then the alternative is I can come over here to the displays panel, and there is a button here that says delete all guides. There is no method of doing this using the tools bar. Unfortunately, it exists here in the displays panel on the panels menu. But there you have a number of different ways of creating a simple stepped block, and what I've tried to show you is the process first of setting down a rectangle, then using push-pull to pull it up. You can either pull it up part of the way, draw the line and pull it up the rest of the way, or you can pull up the basic size of the block and start cutting away. I've showed you how to use the tape measure tool to produce guide lines or guide points. I've shown you how to use some of the standard points that you can snap to. And I've shown you just generally that there are many ways of approaching the task. If you can work with this, you can do most of the simple or regular rectangular shapes that we will work with in our designs. It is a very simple example that I've given you, but the power of it is not to be underestimated. So have a go at this. Reproduce this block following many of the methods as I can. See what works with you. Get your head around it. And good luck with all your drawings from here onwards.